Welcome to Scenario, the deep dive podcast for analysis and reviews. We have a really fascinating question to explore today, something I bet many of you have wondered about. How does our brain actually fall in love?
It's a great question.
You sent us a really compelling source, a TEDx Book and talk by Don Maslar. Our mission today is to unpack the biological, chemical processes at play and see what surprising insights we can dig up.
Sounds good. Buongiorno.
This talk digs into the fascinating interplay of neurotransmitters, hormones, even animal studies, actually, to shed light on this very human experience.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
We'll look at the initial biochemical shifts, the kind of intriguing role of specific hormones, and even get some perspective from the speaker's 95-year-old grandmother.
Oh, interesting. Always good to have that generational wisdom.
Right. Prepare for some aha moments as we navigate the science behind those, butterflies in your stomach.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so starting at the beginning, Dawn Maslar, in her talk, points out straight away that when we're falling in love, a lot happens in our brains. Some neurotransmitters go up, others go down. She doesn't immediately say which. Kind of builds the suspense, doesn't it?
It does. And what's fascinating is that it's not just one thing. It's this whole chemical cocktail kicking off. You mentioned cortisol increasing, the stress hormone. That really explains that nervous, fluttery feeling you get at the start.
Exactly. It's like your body's on high alert, preparing for something significant.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have oxytocin going up, which is linked to those, amorous feelings. So you're stressed, but also drawn in. Kind of a paradox, really.
It absolutely is. And if you layer the sex hormones on top of that, it gets even more interesting. For women, testosterone actually increases a bit. Might make them slightly more assertive, maybe?
Right, and pursuing a partner, perhaps.
Yeah.
And for men.
Testosterone drops, which might make them a bit more passive or maybe more focused on the relationship they're in.
And we can't forget serotonin. That drops in both men and women. Maslar suggests this could be linked to, increased obsession.
Ah, yes, that feeling of constantly thinking about the person.
You just can't get them out of your head, can you? It's like your brain is stuck on repeat.
Precisely. That drop in serotonin is quite key. It's actually similar to patterns seen in conditions like OCD. It shows just how powerful and all-consuming falling in love can be, chemically speaking.
So the big question Maslar raises is, we know what happens, but how do we get there? What flips the switch?
Yeah, what's the trigger mechanism?
She floats some ideas, like tipping point reactions, sudden increases, and then maybe enzymatic reactions causing the decreases later on, like little chemical workers speeding things up or slowing them down.
That distinction is quite insightful. The tipping point could explain that sudden love at first sight feeling sometimes, while the enzymes might explain how those initial intense feelings sort of modulate over time.
Now, at this point in her research journey, Maslar does something pretty relatable. She goes to her cousin, who's a biochemist.
Oh.
And his reaction to her theories, just repeating the word plausible.
Slightly amused. The classic cautious scientist response.
Totally interesting hypothesis, needs more data.
Exactly.
But then the real curveball comes from her 95-year-old grandmother, who just jumps into the conversation.
Oh, here we go.
And basically says, young people mess it all up because they jump into bed too quickly.
Chuckles softly. Right, that's a familiar refrain, isn't it? Rooted in a different time, perhaps.
Definitely. The grandmother insists that men don't fall in love that way. Her advice for women, wait to have sex until the man falls in love.
And how does she define a man being in love?
When he commits. That's her definition. Commitment equals love for a man.
Interesting. That's a very culturally loaded definition, linking love to action and responsibility for men.
You can just imagine the scene, right?
Yeah.
The biochemist's cousin is, understandably, very skeptical. Scientific theories versus grandma's wisdom.
A classic showdown.
But this whole exchange makes Maslar realize something important about researching human love.
Which is?
That it's incredibly difficult to study directly. Ethically, I mean.
Ah, yes. The ethics are a huge hurdle. As Maslar points out, you can't exactly grab someone who's just fallen head over heels and say, mind if I inject this into your brain to see what happens?
Not really ethical, no. So researchers had to turn to the next best thing, animal studies. But which animals fall in love, or at least form bonds, in a way that's relevant to us?
And the answer they landed on was the prairie vole, specifically Microtus ochragaster.
Why them?
Because they're known for being monogamous. They form exclusive pair bonds, much like humans often aspire to in romantic love. That parallel was key.
Okay, so studying these little monogamous voles,
Yeah.
what did they find?
Well, initially they found dopamine levels increased when the voles found a mate, and if they blocked that dopamine,
Let me guess, the loving feeling went away.
pretty much, yes. It suggested dopamine was crucial for the pleasure and motivation side of forming that bond, like the reward system kicking in. Okay, but dopamine increases with other rewarding stuff too, right? Like Maslow mentions gambling, chocolate.
Even Candy Crush, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So dopamine couldn't be the whole story for pair bonding. There had to be more.
Enter oxytocin, the cuddle hormone.
Precisely. They noticed that in female voles showing interest in a male, oxytocin levels went up significantly. And again, if they blocked it,
She lost interest.
lost that bonding feeling, yes.
Yeah.
So oxytocin seemed really key for the female side of the bonding equation.
But there was a problem applying that directly to males.
Right. Testosterone.
Right.
It seems to block or interfere with the effects of oxytocin in males.
So they needed a male equivalent.
And they found vasopressin. It's chemically similar to oxytocin. And guess what happened when they blocked vasopressin in male voles?
Same result. Lost the loving feeling.
You got it. So vasopressin seemed to play a similar bonding role in males, perhaps more linked to mate guarding or commitment-like behaviors in voles. So the tentative conclusion from voles was dopamine plus vasopressin for males. Maybe with that initial testosterone increase we talked about earlier.
And dopamine plus oxytocin for females, a differentiated picture.
Which leads to the obvious question, does any of this vole stuff actually apply to humans?
The million-dollar question.
Maslar actually asked a head of studies at Florida State University this very question. And the response was apparently an enthusiastic, maybe slightly embarrassing, of course, Dawn.
Chuckles.
That researcher's enthusiasm kind of highlights how these fundamental neurochemical pathways for social bonding can be surprisingly conserved across species, even if the details differ.
And apparently Tiffany Love at the University of Michigan also publicly backed this up, confirming similarities between vole and human romantic love systems.
Okay, so there seems to be a consensus building there. It's not a perfect one-to-one mapping, obviously, but the basic chemistry has parallels.
So let's translate it to humans. What happens in women based on this model? Dopamine goes up during dating. The excitement, the chase, the possibility of winning the grand prize of love, as Maslar puts it, that novelty and reward pathway is firing.
Makes sense. And then oxytocin.
That increases with physical closeness, kissing, cuddling, building trust, but the really big surge.
Comes with orgasm.
Exactly. A massive release of oxytocin then, which brings us back to the grandmother's advice, doesn't it?
It really does. That intense oxytocin flood could potentially fast-track bonding and falling in love for women after physical intimacy.
It's biologically plausible, certainly creates a very strong sense of connection.
Okay, what about human men then?
Dopamine also increases when they're having a good time, enjoying the dating process. The reward system is active there too.
And vasopressin, the male bonding hormone in this context.
That seems to increase with sexual stimulation as well. But here's a key difference Maslar highlights based on the research she cites.
What's that?
Unlike oxytocin in women, vasopressin levels in men tend to drop after sex.
Oh, interesting. So the bonding chemical doesn't necessarily stick around in the same way immediately after.
That seems to be the implication. It might explain why sometimes purely physical encounters don't automatically lead to lasting emotional bonds for men in the same way they might for women due to the oxytocin effect.
There's another crucial piece Maslar brings in from a Florida State University study. Receptors.
Ah, yes, absolutely critical. It's not enough just to have the neurotransmitters, the hormones, the chemicals floating around.
You need the docking stations on the brain cells to receive them, right?
Yeah,
Like a key needing a lock.
exactly. Neurotransmitters are the messengers, receptors are the receivers. Without the right receptors in the right places, the message doesn't get through. Think of it like having a strong radio signal but no antenna.
And the fascinating part is that the neurotransmitters themselves actually trigger the building of these receptors.
That's right. It's a process, which means
It takes time. You need sustained high levels of these chemicals for long enough to first build the receptors and then fill them up to get the full effect.
precisely. It adds a time dimension to falling in love, chemically speaking. It's not just an instant switch for everyone.
Which brings us back full circle to Grandma's wisdom again. You know a man's in love with you when he commits.
It seems Grandma might have been onto something, scientifically speaking.
Well, check this out. A U.S. Air Force study followed thousands of servicemen for years, tracking various things, including testosterone levels.
Okay, a longitudinal study. What did they find?
They found that single men generally had relatively high testosterone levels, but after marriage, those levels dropped significantly.
Interesting. And remember we said testosterone can potentially block the effects of oxytocin, the bonding hormone?
Exactly. So a drop in testosterone might actually facilitate deeper bonding, but was it the marriage itself causing the drop or something else?
Good question. How did they test that?
Another study, this one at Harvard, compared testosterone levels in 3 groups: married men, single men, and men who were unmarried but in committed long-term relationships.
Ah, that's the key comparison. And the results.
Just like the Air Force study, single men had high testosterone, married men had lower levels. But the kicker was that men in committed relationships also had low testosterone, similar to the married men.
Wow. So it wasn't the marriage certificate.
It seems not. It looks like the commitment itself, the decision to be in that long-term relationship, is linked to the testosterone drop. It happens before the wedding bells, potentially.
That suggests the hormonal shift is tied to the psychological state of commitment rather than just the legal status. Fascinating.
So if we try to synthesize all this, put it all together for people listening,
Okay, let's try.
it seems women might be, biologically speaking, more likely to experience falling in love, perhaps more rapidly, in connection with physical intimacy because of that big oxytocin
Like
surge.
the powerful bonding effect of oxytocin, yeah.
As men, maybe they're more likely to experience falling in love developing alongside, or maybe even resulting from, commitment. This could be linked to that drop in testosterone, potentially allowing the bonding effects of vasopressin to become more prominent over time. Does that sound right?
That's a very plausible synthesis based on the research Maslar presents. The testosterone drop upon commitment could be a key biological marker or even facilitator of long-term bonding in men, potentially unmasking or enhancing vasopressin's role.
So Maslar's ultimate conclusion.
Her grandmother was brilliant.
And honestly, after digging into the science she presented, it's hard to argue with that, isn't it?
It really is. It's quite remarkable how that piece of, folk wisdom seems to align so well with these complex neurobiological findings about hormones and receptors. It makes you reflect on that connection between our biology and our deepest emotions.
So there you have it. A fascinating look under the hood, so to speak, at that powerful emotion we call love. It really seems to be this complex dance of brain chemicals, hormones, and maybe even the timing of certain relationship milestones.
It definitely influences how and perhaps when we fall.
What stood out to you most in exploring this? Does thinking about the biology change how you view falling in love at all?
For me, it's that interplay between the different systems: dopamine for reward, oxytocin, vasopressin for bonding, serotonin level shifting, testosterone modulating commitment.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah, it's a whole symphony. This
Yeah.
deep dive really highlights how science, maybe combined with a dash of that homespun wisdom, can offer some pretty surprising insights into our most intimate experiences.
Absolutely.
And this is just scratching the surface, of course. There are so many other layers: attraction, personality, shared values, life experiences. They all play a huge role, too.
No doubt. This focuses heavily on the initial biochemical storm, but relationships are obviously much more than just neurotransmitters.
Definitely. We'd encourage listeners to maybe dig deeper into the research on neurotransmitters if this sparked your interest. The whole field of neurobiology and relationships is fascinating. Perhaps think about how these ideas might connect with your own experiences or observations.
It certainly gives you food for thought about your own relationships, past and present.
Indeed. Well, thank you for listening to Scenario.
Until next time.
Until next time.